In this week's Parsha, we come across one of the Torah's presentations of the prohibition of charging interest. We read in Perchav Gimel, Pasuk Chaf, L'sashich l'achicha neshech kesef, if you are lending somebody money, you shouldn't charge them interest. But not only in that kind of loan, but similarly, the Pasuk continues, Neshech ochel, neshech kol davar asher yishach. Whether you're lending food or anything that you might lend, you should not charge interest. When doing so, it is prohibited to charge a fellow Jew interest on a loan. Interestingly, Chazal in the Medrash actually go to great lengths to paint how severe and how terrible and significant this prohibition actually is. Working off of a pasuk in the Navi Yechezkel in Perek Yud Ches, which says, "B'neshech nasan v'tarbis lakach v'chai lo yichya." Someone who borrows and charges interest on loans, v'chai is living, lo yichya will not live. It seems to be a little bit of a riddle. It's a very enigmatic pasuk. So the Medrash has different interpretations of that double language of living at the end of the pasuk, and one of the more powerful ones is that the Medrash says, Misha chaya beribis b'olam hazeh. The first half of the pasuk is referring to someone who in their lifetime charges interest. Lo yichya b'olam haba. The end of the pasuk is saying, okay, if you lived with ribis, lo yichya, but you will not be reborn. And this is an allusion, says the Medrash, to the fact that we know, of course, everyone dies, but what we believe in, and we daven every day, every Shemona Esrei, we daven for and we believe in Tchias HaMesim, the resuscitation of the dead, one of the great mysteries of the universe. Obviously, no one rationally can comprehend that possibility, but it's an article of faith, one of the 13 principles of faith, and we daven for it every day. The resuscitation of the dead, Tchias HaMesim, Olam Haba. So says the Medrash, someone who in this world, in this lifetime, charged interest, Lo Yichya, they will not merit Olam Haba. They will be disqualified from that ultimate Tchias HaMesim. The question is, why this should be so? Why are we so strict? Why do we take such a drastic approach, be so negative and so condemning of a person who charges interest? Okay, it's prohibited. Okay, you shouldn't do it. But why, if of all sins, that's the one that's chosen out for being disqualified from Tchias HaMesim, a person who committed a capital offense, who transgressed even severe prohibitions such as Chilul Shabbos or eating on Yom Kippur and the like, that person potentially could be eligible for Tchias HaMesim, for resuscitation of the dead, but yet someone who lent with ribis, who charged interest, that person can't? It doesn't seem to be logical. It certainly doesn't seem to be proportionate. What is going on? So in the beautiful Sefer Darash Mordechai, he quotes an idea based on Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, the famous rabbi of the old Yeshuv in Yerushalayim. And his starting point is actually a mitzvah that also appears in this week's Parsha, but using an insight there, borrowed from there, he applies it to the issue of interest. And I'm referring to the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan, the idea that if you come across a mother bird hovering over the nest, where you see the chicks or the baby chicks or the eggs. So the Torah tells us that we have a very famous halacha that you can't take the eggs and the mother at the same time. First, you have to send away the mother, and only then you can take the eggs. And the question is why? Of all things, why is that the commandment? And the simplest and most intuitive understanding is that there's a certain mean-spiritedness or cruelty if you were to have the mother witness you taking her children. Okay, I understand that. That makes sense. However, if you think about it, it seems to still be somewhat out of place. After all, if we're talking about a kosher bird, you're allowed to kill the mother. We eat birds just like we eat animals. So if that were allowed, but something much more subtle like the mother seeing us take the eggs, that were not allowed, if we're so worried about the mother's feelings, I have a feeling the mother would prefer not being killed, in all seriousness. So that, we must be missing something. So in fact, says Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, we're missing a very important point. The real issue is as follows. Typically, to catch a bird is not so easy. Birds are quick, and they obviously can fly, and it can be very difficult for a human being to trap a bird, to catch a bird. However, he says, if you come across a bird that's sitting on her eggs, sitting on her chicks, protecting them in the nest, then that mother bird is very reluctant to fly away because she's protecting her children. It pains the bird to run away when a human being is coming to take her eggs, her chicks, and therefore, says Rabbi Chaim Sonnenfeld, the real prohibition, the real nature, of the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan is that we are not allowed to take advantage of the bird's pain, to take advantage of her compassion and of her moment of vulnerability with her children, with her baby chicks or eggs there. There's something particularly cruel about that action, taking advantage of someone's desperation, taking advantage of someone's pain. In a similar vein, they therefore suggest that's what the Torah is highlighting, the Medrash is highlighting in its very strong condemnation of people who charge interest. After all, we know in the modern economy, often it is the most wealthy people who are taking out loans because they're using it to obtain liquid capital, to invest, and to hopefully be successful in business. However, historically, more typically, and certainly in the conception of the Torah, the typical person who is borrowing money is someone who is on the opposite end of the spectrum, someone who's desperately poor, in dire straits, and needs this little, money to somehow start over, to prepare for his basic needs, to try to figure out some kind of a parnasa. And therefore, it says, the Darsh Mordechai says, Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, to take advantage of a person, someone who's so desperate that they need to borrow money, to try to make money off of another person, to take advantage of that kind of situation, to take advantage of that person's desperation and suffering, there's a certain despicable character trait. There's a certain cruelty in that, which is very parallel to what it would be if you took advantage of the mother bird's desperation and sensitivity when she's protecting her children. To take advantage of someone else's desperation, to try to profit off of someone else's pain and vulnerability and weakness, there's something uniquely disqualifying about such behavior, because that's a fundamental character flaw. And therefore, that is why, even though many other sins are terrible, of course, but the cruelty here, which is what is disqualifying, looking to profit off of another person's misery, to take advantage, whether it's the bird, or in this case, the poor person who needs the loan. And therefore, he suggests that's why there's unique, harsh condemnation for someone who lends with interest.